We have an understanding in the United States. There's a principle. It's been a truth of ours forever and ever. These 8 steps are things that you know, no matter where you grew up, how you grew up, how many people raised you, whether you went to church, temple, mosque, or not at all. You know you were supposed to meet somebody of the opposite sex, date a while, fall in love, get engaged, get married, have sex on your honeymoon for the first time, and then make babies. All right, is this unfamiliar to anybody? Now, with a show of hands, how many of you followed it? No. I do not want to know your deepest, darkest secrets. But interestingly enough, I probably already do. So for the last 30 years, I've been a professional sexuality educator, and I love my job. And I know that the statistical truth is very few of you followed those 8 steps. And you know what? It's okay if you did, and it's okay if you didn't. And if you didn't follow those 8 steps, I'm pretty sure your values or someone else's values and your behaviors, when they didn't match on a particular step or steps, created a gap for you. And in this gap probably resides some very heavy feelings like shame, guilt, regret, and fear. What do we do with those big feelings? I don't know about you, but every time I think of great sex, I don't think of fear and shame and regret or guilt. So, what are we going to do about this? We have this common experience, and to be honest, it's not really about sex at all. I know those 8 steps lead to sex. I know people say sex ed, but rarely have I ever been allowed or asked to teach about sex. What I'm asked to teach about is comprehensive sexuality education, topics that relate to all of those 8 steps, not just one. Topics that, frankly, if I had had a moment to be able to anticipate fear, regret, shame, and guilt, then I might have been able to avoid them. Or if I'm teaching comprehensive sexuality ed, I'm helping people build skills to process those feelings or unpack them to move along. Let's face it, sex is uncomfortable. It's a difficult topic for many of us to talk about, mostly because of the way we've been raised, or perhaps things that have happened to us that weren't consensual, which, by the way, that's violence, not sex. And the bottom line is, we go through changes throughout our lifespan. So perhaps you were uncomfortable in puberty, or if you were pregnant, or when you've had a lot of alcohol, or as you're aging. We go through these changes with discomfort. So, what do I know about uncomfortable? That's my mom. I'm a native Daytonian raised by a mom who is an ex-nun who put me through 14 years of Catholic education, and I grew up and I teach sex. So, I know a little something about feeling that. I also want you to know my mom retired from Dayton Public Schools after 43 years, and she believed very much in the power of education. I was raised not only by her, but also by other teachers and principals and janitors and librarians and administrators, and they all reminded me and helped me to associate the fact that education is an act of love. So, what do we do with all of this? How do we handle the discomfort? Where do we go to learn more? Here's what we're going to start with. This word sexuality, it's a big word. It doesn't mean just identity, as in sexual orientation. What it means is sex. I want you to think about that verb. Things that you like to do, things that you want to do, things that you're not going to do, but you still think about doing, right? I also want to bring up the point that sex also means assigned at birth. And that means a lot in this day and time. It also meant a lot in the 70s with Title IX, sex assigned at birth. Now, the word sexual is really related to feelings. It's about erotic energy. It's about how we feel in our head and our heart and our hooch. And then we have the word sexuality, and that's what I teach. I teach about identities. I teach about how we show up in many different ways in different spaces. What you wore to TEDx is not something that you necessarily are going to wear on a third date, right? What you wear to work isn't necessarily something that you would wear to go chop down trees, unless that's your work. Sorry, right? So when we talk about identities, we also have to remember what we're doing here. We're actually trying to progress and promote sexual health. We really want to encourage well-being. And we want to support pleasure. Do we really have enough conversation about what feels good in our lives? And then add the sex component to it. And I want to do this based on his, her, and their values. We do this according to your values. Let's talk about the Pilgrims. So when the Pilgrims landed, what we know is that we, the people, have been inundated with those 8 steps since. And that's okay. But what we need to say is that the first sex educators, who were clergy, were really morality educators. Nothing wrong with that. Let's fast forward. Let's go to the 1950s. And what we know in the 1950s is that morality education was still very much in the pulpit, but also moved to schools and became what we called family life education. And then the content also included how to do marriage, how to do family, the roles of people in that family. Boys do this, girls do this, adults do this. And what we also know is that the focus of sexuality became what was an adolescent issue. And what we did, sexuality would then be defined as a health problem. Let's fast forward again. Let's go from the 90s, where we were leaving risk reduction and harm reduction education behind, and we moved into abstinence education. And in the year 2000, the federal government coined a new phrase called abstinence only until marriage, AOUM. And what we know is that morality education continued to be alive and well and in our schools. Let's face it, friends, nobody gets married to get divorced. Nobody has sex to get chlamydia, or HIV, or HPV, or monkeypox. If I started, the thigh bone's connected to the, you'd be able to finish something or other. You know about the skeletal system. If I asked, what does the cardiovascular system do? You'd be able to tell me about that. If we were talking about the Taco Bell you ate the other day, and it goes in your mouth, and you chew it, and you swallow it, you'd be able to tell me, Richelle, everybody poops. And you'd talk to me about the digestive system. But, friends, what do you know about the endocrine system? We know, on average, in the United States, a woman will most likely want 2 pregnancies. She spends 3 years of her life thinking about getting pregnant, being pregnant, and postpartum. She spends 3 decades or more of her life preventing pregnancy. When I teach young people in college, typically I call them 20-year-olds. When I teach the 20-year-olds, the girls are very, very interested in letting me know that when they go out to drink at a party or in a bar, they have a whole system where they cover their drinks, or they have friends watch their drinks so they don't get roofied. And I'm a huge fan of hearing that. Yes, nice job. But I ask the same women and their friends, what's in a birth control pill? And what happens in your body when you take a birth control pill? And they don't know. The provision of sexuality education is a subversive act. If you don't mind to take a moment and look at this slide. And what it's prompting for me is the idea of needing to include critical thinking, needing to include a holistic approach in our discussions about sex, sexual, and sexuality. I know that teaching sexuality education is a subversive act because for 30 years, I've heard the negative media messages. I've been accustomed to the political positioning. I'm very aware of the religious rhetoric. I know that parents want to censor. Ultimately, no one's ever called a math teacher and said, "Please don't teach the Pythagorean theorem to my child. We've got this." Friends, I'd like you to consider that comprehensive sexuality education, when taught by well-qualified people, perhaps even certified sexuality educators, will save lives. And saving lives is more than just preventing death. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. So let's institute comprehensive sexuality education in K through 12th grades, taught by qualified folks, to see how we can impact our culture. We know that there are generations of good people who, if we just had this information, maybe even back in the day where we could consider it throughout our lifespan, we might feel a little different about the gap. And if we don't institute quality sexuality education, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to work the next day.